Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Ann McGee is going to talk about the trouble with compliance training.
So I am going to do this 30-minute presentation in 15 minutes. Thank you, Doug. So that's all right. We're good. We want to get started right away because Chris is going to be doing the checklist manifesto, which is one of my favorite authors of all time. So I'm really excited to see his presentation. So I was asked to do anti-discrimination training and ethics training on the executive orders, and Kimberly approached me and said, instead of doing that, which we've all gone through, can we talk about what the trouble is with our presentation? And I went, ooh, because with 20 plus years of state government, I have literally seen anti-discrimination training the same way for 20 years, just different slides and different presentations. So, with that being said, on the 17th, I've been asked to go to a board meeting and do anti-discrimination training. So I'll be doing the same thing that we've been doing for 20 years for the state. So I just got to let you know that. But I figure, I talked yesterday about competencies, and I talked the talk. So I should probably walk the walk a little bit. And this was kind of a difficult one for me to kind of put my arms around as an HR person, knowing that a lot of our job is, progressive discipline and people who violate these executive orders. But I'd like to just challenge you a little bit just to hear what the experts and research has shown on what the trouble is with our compliance training. Okay, so the topics that we're going to cover really quickly are the 3 traits of unsuccessful diversity training, and I won't go over all of the other bullet points because we can all read, and I'm going to try to make this shorter than 30 minutes. So we're going to go through this training, and I hope everyone received their handout that Stacy and Jenny sent out. So a lot of the information in this training today was from that handout. And I really do recommend you guys read it because when I started to kind of dive into the research of this, it was an eye-opener to me. And it really makes sense when it comes to competencies. So 3 traits of unsuccessful diversity training. The first bullet point is the reason why I'm going to a board meeting. It is mandatory for everybody. And they're saying research shows, Hoggle, this white paper, Training for Diversity, that's one of the main reasons why diversity training fails. One thing that I've learned is that diversity training started really around the 1960s when Title VII came in. It started kind of in the 50s, but it was the 60s when Title VII, when all of that, the law came into effect. And what they're saying is that harassment is often presented as bad for business rather than it being morally wrong, treating somebody different based on your bias. They've also shown that compliance training can actually make behaviors worse. And one of the things that I noticed when WISE training started, and which is a great training, and I'm grateful that we have WISE, but we used to actually go out and train. Hi, Tricia. Sorry. So, but one of the things that I noticed that after WISE started and a lot of our supervisors were going, my job got busier. I had a lot more harassment cases. I had a lot more investigations. I did so many letters. I traveled everywhere. And I remember saying to Lon Fow, I wonder if it's because of the WISE. I wonder if that's part of the reason why. One of the things that social scientists have explained is that people rebel against rules to assert their autonomy. And if you've listened to Doug, he would be one of those people. So, I mean, when I was reading through the information, I thought of my husband a lot and thought, gosh, I would hate to be that person to train him on anti-discrimination. So to better understand the trouble of it, the source is what you have as a handout. So we're going to talk a little bit about Dubin and Khalif. And I don't know if I'm saying those names right, so I apologize if I'm not. But so we're just kind of putting this information up there for you. But what they have found that the returns of diversity programs really are poor. And the data points found that for women and minorities, the kind of training that we've been doing really has harmed them. More to the point, they found that diversity training infuriates the people it's intended to educate, and that's white men. So I have to say, and I'm going to skip a few things here on my bullet points, but you know, I think we've all in HR, we've probably been paying attention to the newspapers and the TV and I mean, the Me Too movement. And I'm grateful for the movement. I think that it's time for that awareness. Also, Aaron, popcorn. Aaron, I see the popcorn, just letting you know. We missed it yesterday. But, you know, I'm grateful for that movement because people need to be able to speak out and they need to be able to say this is wrong. However, because of that, I don't know about you, I'm sure everybody in this room has been asked to do anti-discrimination training more. And I've been, you know, we have our 8 MOU agencies, and so I've been asked to go into several of them, one of them predominantly white male, and asked to do the anti-discrimination training. And I have never seen such anger from the crowd as I have just recently. And you know, just angry about the whole anti-discrimination and the Me Too movement. And, you know, it just kind of made me pause and think, what can we do differently? What is it that we can do? So again, the diversity programs that get results. So I love this chart up here. One of the few things that I want to point out is the voluntary training, the mentoring, and the diversity task forces. So if we just change the way that we train just a little bit. Now, let me go back. HR professionals need to know what these policies are. We absolutely need to know what the prohibited conduct is, and our supervisors do as well, because we need to make sure that people are treated fairly. But Brian Well from Google came up with this idea of coming up with a unconscious bias training. And this training is supposed to arm employees with the tools they need to recognize that they have prejudices buried deep inside. All of us do. And the training helps us recognize it and then neutralizes those prejudices. And he hit on the notion that if we believe everyone around us is trying to fight those stereotypes, that we'll do the same. And what it really boils down to is awareness. And I think it would be great if HR, if we all as a community get together and maybe come up with a diversity task force and come up with a different way that we can train our employees on how to act rather than what not to do. So the downside of the diversity label, you know, programs aren't usually branded as diversity efforts. When I was reading through this particular slide, which Kimberly put together, I got to give her credit for this, but I thought of like the progressive discipline. And I thought about, you know, we work really hard to make sure that we have all the information. This is creaking and scary. No, I'm fine. I'm like, oh God. But we need to make sure we have all the information down. Like what Brenda explained yesterday, we need to have that documentation. We need to ensure that we have all that information in our letters. We have to remind them of all of the policies and the executive orders and the rules that they have violated. And then at the very end of those letters, we say, in the future, it is my expectation that you, boom, and we give them those positive behaviors. So if we're doing it that way, why can't we share with them beforehand those positive behaviors? I think we really concentrate on the prohibited conduct. And that's, we need to know that as HR. You know, I'm not dismissing that at all. But I'm just saying, if we're going to look at competencies, and if we're going to say these are the behaviors that you need to have to be successful in your position, then why don't we make a change in the way that we do diversity training, and we make it an inclusive training? One of the things I heard about just recently was Starbucks. Has everyone heard about the bias training that Starbucks did just recently? Yeah, they shut down every store for one afternoon. So I looked that up the other day because I had heard about it, but I have 5 minutes. So I didn't know too much about that. And what it was the unconscious bias training that this guy from Google did. And they made it so that people could sit and talk about what they have done unconsciously, but learned a lesson from it. One of the stories, there were many stories, and they made it very comfortable for employees to explain that, was somebody saw some guy in the line, and he had a scruffy beard, and he kind of looked, dirty, and he was standing there, and they told him no loitering in the line. He wasn't. He was standing there with his wife. But because of that unconscious bias that employee had, they discriminated against this guy. And they've talked about that, and they talk about the unbiased, thank you, training and what can we do differently. So what can we do? We can change our culture, and we can foster an inclusive workplace. And if you go to the competency dictionary that we shared yesterday, you can look at those soft skills in there. We need to talk to people about interpersonal relations. We need to talk about professional integrity. And part of our leadership competency is fostering an inclusive workplace. So here are 6 behaviors of inclusive leaders. So here are those that are up there that came from this source that's listed on the slide. And what these do and what we have in our dictionary really creates a trusting environment. And I think that's what this whole problem with the compliance training is are we creating a positive, trusting environment, or are we making people scared and feel like they have to walk on eggshells? I'm going to skip this, but I'd like for you to think about it. What opportunities do we have to serve as role models for an inclusive leadership? And I'd like for us to all think about that. What can we do as HR to create an inclusive environment for our employees, to make them successful, to make them feel like they are in a trusting environment? And then I also want you to think about how can we support employee development to strive to change the culture? What can we do differently in our training? Am I doing okay? 3 minutes, okay. Another thing I want you guys to talk about or think about is ethics, our code of ethics. Our code of ethics says that it's a yardstick, that we just have a yardstick to decide on, what is right and wrong. And a lot of things when you're in the middle of something, it's about rationalization. It's about using your judgment and decision-making skills. Because, and this is a quote, believing bad decisions are only made by bad people is a dangerous perspective because it allows us to assume that because we are already a good person, we don't need to worry about doing a bad thing or making a bad choice. I think I am the first one to say that I have made bad choices in my life, but I've learned from those choices. And a lot of times when we are in the middle of something, sometimes we don't think things through completely. So here's some ideas for best practices for reducing those rationalizations. And so, read through that. And then one of the things that I read was about motivated blindness. And I thought that was very interesting because, I think we're all looking for that easy thing and, oh, that looks really, really good. And you kind of move forward with a decision and then you realize, oh, I didn't realize that was a competitor and I shouldn't have, take that tickets to the Rockies game or something like that. One of the things that my dad always said is if something looks too good to be true, it usually is. So I always try to remind myself, instead of making a knee-jerk decision, really sit back and think about it. And if somebody wants me to make a decision right away, then the answer should be no. And that to me is just judgment. And that to me is just rationalization. So additional resources, the Fostering an Inclusive Workplace is actually included in our competency dictionary. And Kimberly also has a Google community out there with a lot of different resources. So if you are interested in maybe making some changes to your training and your compliance training, please go to the website and there's some really great information. Kimberly is also a great resource for you if you have questions, and of course, I'm always available if you need me. And yes? You know, a lot of them, and I wrote them down here. Thank you. A lot of them felt like they had to walk on eggshells. I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget. Okay. So a lot of them interpreted that training as walking on eggshells around mainly women and minorities. They felt like they had to choose their words really carefully so they wouldn't offend somebody. So instead of actually talking with somebody, they just chose not to. Other people thought that, and this is from Anand and Winters, so this is maybe not from that particular training, but some surmised that it meant white men were villains, and still others assumed that they would lose their jobs to minorities and women, while others concluded that women and minorities were simply too sensitive. And in that training, that's exactly what they thought. Those women are too sensitive. Why did they wait 10 years before they said anything about, you know, sexual harassment? So I think that, you know, the way that we're training is really targeted to white men, and it really is doing the opposite. Instead of creating an inclusive environment, it's feeling we're alienating white men. And I think that's the big takeaway for that I had for that kind of training. Sure. Any other questions? All right, thank you.